To write accessible documentation, it's important that you have a foundation in how to write inclusive language. Inclusive language is a sensitive topic. It's absolutely essential that we spend time thinking about the words we learned growing up and in our technical education. I'm going to do my best to introduce the best practices for inclusive language, but I encourage you to seek out additional resources to continue your education. To write inclusive documentation and UI copy, you must avoid biases and slang, or any expressions that discriminate against groups of people based on race, gender, or socioeconomic status. Inclusive language also avoids language that's ableist. We should always aim to be more inclusive no matter what we do or create. Be mindful of the words that you choose. There are several resources about inclusive language and documentation, and we can't cover it all in this tip. We're going to focus specifically on language centered around disabilities. Often in technical language, you might come across the words enable and disable for toggles and surface activations. More often than not, we can choose more appropriate language. For example, you could use turn on and turn off, start and stop, or activate and deactivate. We've already transitioned away from enable and disable in many of Google's products. When talking about people with disabilities, the word disabled is not a bad word. When talking about a specific individual, it's important to ask them how they prefer to identify and what language they use. When writing about products and technology, choose clearer alternatives instead of enabled or disabled. Make sure that the language that you write is reflected in the documentation and in the user interface. Another example of language to avoid in our documentation is colloquialisms. For example, the phrase blind spot is often used to describe a sighted person's tendency not to physically see a detail. Instead of writing blind spot, remind users to take special care to review a certain content or parts of a product. Colloquial language like blind spot can be insensitive and might also be very difficult to translate. Some common colloquial phrases are inclusive of mental health language. Unless you're writing about mental health, be wary of using any mental health language as descriptors. For example, words like insane or crazy are not only colloquial but also insensitive. Instead of describing a problem or a person as insane, be descriptive of the situation. I bet you'll find more inclusive words to use. Ultimately, writing inclusive language helps people around the world understand our content. There are a number of examples throughout history of removing common usage of insensitive language. This includes harmful words which were once considered industry standard language. It's important that we continue to make these improvements in our language centered around disabilities and accessibility. How have you taken action to make your language more inclusive? How will you update your documentation to be more inclusive for people with disabilities? There are so many specific questions that can arise when thinking about inclusive, accessible language.
Visit goo.gle/accessible-content to learn more about this and other accessibility writing tips.